Three-day fire at the seven-story Doro Rise is out, and the luxury apartment building is now a total loss. So what happens next? We're joined now by Ron Woods, a Jacksonville structural engineer with more than 4 decades of experience in the area. Good morning, Ron. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Ann.
So, Ron, the building's owners are they've got an emergency demolition permit to tear down this building. What's the hurry in this case?
Well, obviously, they're paying a lot of interest for a large loan, so they want to move things along as quickly as possible, I'm sure. And it's not going to be a fast process, so they want to get started with the demolition as quickly as they can.
And so, what is your take on the moving that quickly? Is there any information that could be lost in a teardown about the source of the fire? Is there time to conduct a thorough investigation?
Well, I doubt that the state fire marshal is going to release the building until they at least have some reasonable estimation of what the cause was and where it occurred. So once that's done, then there's probably not a whole lot more they can do with regard to that. The investigation on this would be extremely dangerous because the building is in a state of partial collapse already.
And so how do they approach that? I know I spoke to you after the parking garage collapse in Riverside, and they were using technology to kind of assess the situation and keep people from having to put their own lives at risk.
Yeah, that's exactly the approach that they're likely going to take. Robotics, drones, anything essentially that can get in there that's not live to risk life, and so yeah, they'll use the available technology as best they can. The difficulty with this building is the parking garage is relatively open. This building is chopped up into apartments, and so there are lots and lots of walls in there. So it makes it much more difficult to maneuver and to get anything around in an area where you can actually observe some of those problems.
What surprised you about this? It's unusual to have a structure fire this large, and even the fire chief seemed, kind of taken aback at the scale of the destruction.
Well, the most significant part of it is all wood frame, and it's very flammable. None of the wood, for the most part, that's used in that construction is treated in any way to resist fire. The fire resistance comes from supplementary things like the drywall, and like the separation of certain areas so that fire doesn't progress in a certain way. So all of those things are certainly considerations, but it's wood frame, and so it's a tinderbox.
And so for people who live in apartments, not necessarily luxury or even high-rise apartments, but there is a lot of wood construction in Florida, should people be concerned at how difficult it was to put out this fire and how completely destructive it was?
Yes, and I think that typically large fires like this and catastrophic conditions fairly often result in some at least critical look at building codes and local ordinances with regard to the construction and the protection of the construction and protection of the people who live there.
So the plan to demolish this, they've got the emergency permit. What kind of timetable do you think ultimately we'll be seeing? I know certainly the Berkman, when that building partially collapsed, that apartment building stood, I think, for like 14 years before it was finally torn down. You expect it to move a little faster here?
Yeah, no doubt. There were lots of issues with the Berkman that had nothing to do with the construction. They had a lot to do with developers going out of business and things like that. So it was difficult just to get permissions and get people going on that. So that one was a different case. This one, everybody's live and active with regard to being involved with it. Developers are committed to it. The city is committed to it. So I would anticipate that it'll move along rather quickly once they get the release of the building itself.
And you say quickly for people who, don't know how an industry functions like that. That's still not just overnight, right?
No, it would just the demolition of the building itself will probably take somewhere between 2 and 3 months.
Okay. And how will it be done?
This will be done manually. It won't be done by implosion like ultimately the Berkman was done.
Why is that?
But well, because of a couple of things. One, the wood frame structures have a lot of structural redundancy, meaning that when there's stress applied in an area, it gets distributed in some odd ways sometimes. So trying to find a trigger point for implosion, like you could easily do with reinforced concrete or structural steel, it's much more difficult with a wood frame structure like this. So it's better to go in and take the building apart manually than it is to try to implode it in one large activity.
And just briefly, how long do you think the adjacent buildings could be impacted?
They are actually going to be impacted until those walls come down.
Wow. So it might not be safe for some of those surrounding businesses to function as normal?
That's quite possible unless they, there are some ways that they can essentially protect the other buildings. They can also do some selective dismantling before they start demolishing the whole thing that would take away the obvious issues of like a fall zone, for instance. You've got essentially 7 stories of wall up there. So that's about 75, 85 feet. And the fall zone is going to be that far out at least.
Wow.
So they'll have to take maybe take the top 15, 20 feet off of those walls
Gotcha.
selectively.
Ron,
and then move forward.
We're going to have to leave it there. But Ron, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
No problem.